Well, I'm thinking of a teenager who caught me at a reading once in San Francisco way back. This would be in the 70s or 80s. 80s probably. And she said, "Do you know why I love Star Trek?" And that would be the old Star Trek, you know. And I said, "Well, I like Star Trek too, but why do you love Star Trek?" And she said, "Because it shows me a future where I can live." And you know, remember, Star Trek was very idealistic and very moral and so on. And here was this 15-year-old. That's what she was getting. That's why she was reading science fiction and watching it.
That was a clip of Ursula K. Le Guin speaking in 2015 with The Nation magazine about her choice to become a writer of imaginative science fiction. Ursula always spoke highly of Star Trek for its ability to give us hope by portraying a future full of justice. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Dr. Joseph Orosco of the Inares Project for Alternative Futures at Oregon State University. In this episode of TrekWars at OSU, I want to explore Ursula K. Le Guin's love poems to Star Trek. It hasn't been until very recently that Star Trek has returned Ursula's attention. In the third season of Star Trek Discovery, we find the crew of the Starship Discovery thrown into the future of the 32nd century, almost 900 years into the future. There, they find a galaxy suffering from the after effects of a large-scale environmental disaster. It's a very different universe from the one that characterized the Star Trek of Captains Kirk, Picard, Sisko, and Janeway. Discovery finds that the Federation has disintegrated. Core planets like Earth and Vulcan are no longer part of Starfleet. The galaxy is ruled by criminal syndicates, and planets have to fend for themselves now that energy is scarce and warp travel is limited. But when the lone Discovery is able to finally re-encounter the remnants of Starfleet, we find a big surprise. Here, we see Admiral Charles Vance, the Supreme Commander of Starfleet, coordinating a rescue mission with some of the very few ships that he has at his disposal. You'll see that one of the ships is named the USS Le Guin, led by Captain Bondra. Here, you see the Paramount Art Department's rendition of the USS Le Guin, along with Captain Bondra. Now, I can't help but think that they chose an actor intentionally that resembled the mature Ursula to be at Le Guin's helm. We don't know much about the Le Guin or Mars-class starships in Discovery, but I think it's kind of amazing to imagine that Ursula's legacy has continued to make an impact on humanity more than 1,000 years into the future. The showrunners for season 3 of Discovery have even admitted a deeper connection to Ursula's work. Alex Kurtzman has admitted that he was inspired by her perhaps most well-known short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, when he was thinking of the storyline for the Federation in the 32nd century. I won't give up much more right now for fear of giving away too many spoilers, but it's important to recognize this intentional placing of Ursula at the center of the third season of Discovery. There are, of course, some similarities between Ursula's science fiction and the vision of Gene Roddenberry. Star Trek debuted on network television in 1966, the same year that Ursula published Rokanan's World, the first story in what would become her Hainish universe. Roddenberry wanted to show the world in which humanity had learned to value diversity and to set out to the stars as curious explorers, not as conquerors or warriors. And in a similar way, Ursula's Hainish stories portray a galactic federation of humanoids, which includes Earth, but it's not an Earth of Starfleet and the Federation. It's a place on the brink of collapse, and it has much to learn from the other worlds and ways of life that are shown in amazing detail through Ursula's keen anthropological style of writing. Ursula continued to tell stories of her Galactic Federation from 1966 to about 2000, but in those 30 plus years, she continued to admire Star Trek storytelling. In 1994, Ursula wrote a short appreciation of Star Trek in TV Guide magazine, talking about her love of Star Trek: The Next Generation. She opens by writing, quote, "For years now, I've had an appointment with the crew of the Enterprise 2 nights a week. It's hard to remember that at first I didn't like the program. I said things like, if Q knows everything, how could he be so stupid? And if Wesley is 15, how could he know everything? But then I caught a rerun of The Offspring, in which Data builds a daughter, and I was hooked. Ursula particularly admired the ensemble cast, particularly the women characters. She writes, quote, the casting of the show was superb from the start. Gates McFadden, Marina Sirtis, and Michelle Barrett brought depth and complexity to the conventionally feminine roles of Dr. Crusher, Counselor Troy, and Laxana Troy. Many of us wish that Tassa Yar, Denise Crosby, and Ensign Rowe, Michelle Forbes, had stayed on board to shake things up, but at least we got Whoopi Goldberg wearing those great hats. The lead male characters, all impressive separately, were also great team players, their characters changing and deepening in relationship to one another. It was clear, however, that Ursula had a special crush on Worf. She writes, quote, Worf, Michael Dorn, was my first love. That voice, Richter 6.5, that forehead, those dark, worried eyes, those ethical problems. The glimpses of Klingon dynastic struggles were like Shakespeare's plays about the kings of England, full of quarrels and treachery and kinsfolk at each other's throats, just like family Christmas. I love that stuff. Worf, caught between two worlds, was a powerful figure. Tragic. Ursula, of course, was never much for conventions or what was normal. So she admitted she also liked to flirt with Jean-Luc Picard. She writes, quote, being in love with him I thought was safe until I saw the episode in which Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, lives a whole life in 25 minutes. And then the one where he revisits his home and brother in France. Such a strong, sensitive, intelligent man. So short, so bald, so beautiful. Well, so I'm a bigamist. My favorite episode may be the one where Picard is alone with Captain Dathon, Paul Winfield, an alien whose language is all myth and metaphor. A beautiful idea. And the way the alien soul shone through his ugly, piggish, snouted face was magic. Ursula wrote that she liked three things in particular about the Star Trek universe. One, that it didn't portray the world as simply a battle between good and evil, black and white, but it tried to show a complex moral decision-making universe, and it had multi-dimensional villains. And two, it always showed violence not as a solution, but as a problem to be dealt with through other means. But the biggest draw for Ursula was the way in which Star Trek tried to transform the viewer with its stories, to help us to expand our imaginations in a way that could make us more ethical people. She writes, quote, what I myself like best about it is the way it transforms vision. The best example of this magic is Geordi's visor. At first, I saw Geordi, LeVar Burton, as a blind guy with a prosthetic device. I didn't know when the transformation happened, but I began to see him, and I got uncomfortable when he took off his visor. I felt this discomfort even in one dream sequence where his eyes were perfectly normal. Who cares about normal when what you care about is Geordi? This is what science fiction does best. It challenges our idea of what we see as like ourselves. It increases our sense of kinship. When Ursula penned these thoughts, Gene Roddenberry had already passed away. Star Trek The Next Generation had completed its seventh and final season. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was into its first season and was bringing to viewers a different take on the Star Trek universe. Nonetheless, Ursula felt it was important to mark the moment in storytelling, and so she concluded her note of appreciation in this way, quote, naturally fearless and innovative, Gene never stopped learning. He knew television's power to persuade by showing, and he wanted to use that power well. On the Enterprise, we see the difference of racial and alien types, gender difference, handicaps, apparent deformities, all accepted simply as different ways of being human. In this, the next generation has been light years ahead of its predecessors, its imitators, and practically everything else on television. The continuing mission of the Starship Enterprise has been to take us out of the smog of fear and hate into an open space where difference is opportunity and justice matters, and you can still see the stars. Now, let me conclude with an actual poem that Ursula wrote about Star Trek. This comes from her collection of stories from 1991 called Sea Road Chronicles of Klatsland. In one of the stories, a librarian is having a conversation with a Star Trek fan, and they talk about their favorite Star Trek episodes. The librarian, who is a stand in for Ursula, admits that the episode Amok Time, in which Kirk and Spock fight during Spock's time of Ponfar, is her favorite. The Star Trek fan responds, quote, except he never, you know, they just had a fight over the girl, him and Captain Kirk, and then they left. The librarian responds, I was thinking how Mr. Spock was never unbuttoned, never lulled, kept himself shadowy, unfulfilled, and so we loved him. And poor Captain Kirk, going from blonde to blonde, would never understand that he himself loved Mr. Spock. Truly, hopelessly, forever. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments about Ursula's love poems to Star Trek, please leave them down below. Until next time.